And now I'd like to introduce Deputy Assistant Secretary Williams. Bisa Williams is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service with the rank of Minister Counselor and is currently Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of African Affairs, responsible for West Africa and African economic policy issues. She served as U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Niger from 2010 to 2013. She was the coordinator for Cuban Affairs in the Bureau for Western Hemisphere Affairs in the department from 2007 to 2010. From 2005 to 2007, Ms. Williams served on the White House staff at the National Security Council as Director for International Organizations. Her other postings include Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Port Louis, Mauritius, Africa Watcher at the U.S. Embassy in Paris, Special Assistant to the Secretary of State, and Advisor on African Development and Economic Issues at the U.S. Mission to the United Nations in New York. Ms. Williams speaks French, Spanish, and Portuguese. A proud native of Trenton, New Jersey, Ms. Williams holds a Master of Science degree in National Security Strategy from the National War College of the National Defense University in Washington, a Master of Arts degree in Comparative Literature from the University of California, Los Angeles, and she received her Bachelor of Arts degree cum laude in Black Literature of the Americas from Yale. Please join me in welcoming Bisa Williams.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, that's Diplomacy 101. You respond. Okay. I am really, really excited to have you all here. This is my first time speaking to a grouping like this, so I'm very excited about it. Here at the State Department, I should say. We often go out on the road, and I love to meet with university students, and I was very happy to hear the different kinds of university representation that we have here. My son's a graduate of Howard, I will say that too. So we've got the UC family, we've got the Howard family, we've got our Washington, D.C. group. And I hope all of you will consider very seriously a career in the Foreign Service, although that's not going to be my primary message to you today. I've been asked to talk about U.S. policy in Africa, and I am looking forward to your questions. Those of you who work at the White House, some of this will not be news to you, I'm sure. But I do think that since we just finished an incredibly positive week on Africa in the first week of August, I would start with the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit and all the accomplishments from that, and then move out. So if any of the White House aides here think that I've missed something, I would appreciate your chiming up and letting me know. So let's jump right in, because I'm also going to stop at quarter, have you said? Stop at when? I think I've got a little bit more to say here than I... Okay. Okay, so I'll speak quickly. First of all, the United States has a very rich relationship with the continent of Africa, but let's talk about sub-Saharan Africa. With almost all of the states in sub-Saharan Africa, we certainly have relationships and programs going with all of civil society across the continent. There are a couple of political issues on the continent that have made our relations not move as fast as we would like them to move. But by and large, we have a presence, we are felt, and we are in communication with all of the peoples on the continent, which is quite exciting. In the first week of August, the United States held a first-of-its-kind summit. It was the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit. And I say it's the first of the kind. It was the first of its kind for the United States. And President Obama invited the leaders of 51 African nations, plus the head of the African Union, to come here and really talk about the broad spectrum of our mutual interests. We talked about the key challenges facing Africa, and we also talked about the areas where we saw great opportunity to expand our work together. So on the summit, it was an event that surpassed everyone's expectations. This summit reflected a reality that even as many African countries continue to face great challenges, we're also seeing an undeniable emergence of a new and healthy prosperity in Africa, a prosperity that is being led by Africans themselves. During the course of the Leaders Summit, the United States announced $33 billion in commitments for new trade and investment from U.S. companies, and another $4 billion for development investment in Africa. And that includes investment in maternal and child health care, the delivery of vaccines and drugs. But more importantly than the announcement of the kinds of money that we were going to try to generate and invest in the country, this summit and that week of focus on Africa in all of its dimensions really reflected a new model for our partnership that we want to have with that part of the globe. At its core, the purpose of the summit was to honor an American partnership with the African states. It's one that focuses on African capacity to solve problems and on Africa's capacity to grow. The feedback following the summit has been overwhelmingly positive. Many of the leaders who were at first skeptical, since we had never done anything like this before, they told us how pleased they were with their time here in the United States, and in particular with the opportunity that that week of Focus on Africa gave them to interact with America's private sector. One entire day of the summit was devoted to the U.S.-Africa Business Forum, which was co-hosted by the Department of Commerce and Bloomberg Philanthropies. This was an enormous mobilization of the U.S. business community in support of increasing trade and investment ties on the continent. The reality that most people just don't know, the reality is that the top 10 fastest growing economies are in Africa. The African continent is home to a burgeoning middle class with an appetite for U.S. products, and there is opportunity for job creation in the United States and in Africa as these African economies grow. And American CEOs are realizing that more and more. As part of that $33 billion that I mentioned, President Obama announced that $7 billion would be devoted to new financing to promoting U.S. exports to and investments in Africa under the Doing Business in Africa campaign. We call that DBIA. This campaign is designed to connect American businesses with their African partners, with their African counterparts, and to support Americans growing their businesses by investing in Africa or partnering with them. We also want to expand access to financing options for American businesses that want to export to Africa. DBIA is also intended to reduce barriers that we encounter in certain countries in Africa, barriers to trade and investment. Also, during the week of the Leader Summit, we hosted a very successful 13th AGOA Ministerial. AGOA, that's the African Growth and Opportunity Act. AGOA is that piece of legislation which was passed to encourage exports from African countries into the United States. It gives them it's basically free trade, very, very low or zeroed out tariffs, bringing their exports to the United States. And since it was enacted in 2000, AGOA has really been the cornerstone U.S. trade policy tool with sub-Saharan Africa, and it has contributed to the diversification and competitiveness of those economies through job creation and market opportunities. But AGOA hasn't just strengthened the U.S.-Africa trade relationship and helped the development of African economies. It has also been an effective engagement tool for broader issues. For example, in Madagascar, which was just reinstated in June, this past June, right before the forum, into AGOA, it had been suspended. And in Swaziland, which this year we deemed ineligible. In other words, we use it as one of our discussion tools and mechanisms to say, we want your exports, but we want exports that we know are going to be free from child labor, or we want to encourage the kind of economic reforms that you need in order for us to feel good trading with you. So it is a major economic reform policy tool. During the ministerial, there was broad consensus to reauthorize AGOA. I should have told you. It's a piece of legislation that had a sunset clause, and that sunset timeline is really for the year 2015, the September or August of 2015. Therefore, we really would like to have AGOA reauthorized, have a new extended deadline on it, because the benefits of it are really have really been kicking in over the last, I'd say, 7 years or so. During the ministerial, there was broad consensus, yes, to reauthorize, hoping that it would be reauthorized before the expiration in September of 2015. The Obama administration and many African governments identified AGOA renewal as a top priority. But for the legislation as it stands now, for it to be the most effective as a development tool, the U.S. viewpoint is that we still need to tinker with it. As I said, it's 15 years old already. Over the last 6 or 7 years, I can confidently say we're really seeing, okay, reform measures are really kicking in. Some African states are beginning to export more. But really, AGOA has not realized the goals we had for it or the African states had for it. So we think that some of the reasons for that is that we need to change it a little bit, modify it a little bit. So at any rate, in order for it to be an effective development tool, AGOA has got to adapt to the changes that we're seeing in the global economy. And we've got to apply to it some lessons that we've learned from our trading experience. So as we move forward with AGOA, we're going to work to have more American companies investing in and selling their products in Africa. And we want more African companies trading across African borders with each other and trading with American companies and investing in the United States. We also want increased economic opportunity and shared prosperity, both in Africa and in the United States. Underpinning this increased investment and shared prosperity has got to be expanded access to electricity. Very hard to really push an industrial growth if you can't turn on the lights, or if you can't be assured that your lights are going to stay on once the power starts going. That is why President Obama also announced this year a new level of $300 million in assistance per year to expand the reach, the access to power, the reach of electricity to Africans. It's called the Power Africa Initiative. Many of you from the White House hopefully know this by heart. Our goal is to provide access to at least 60 million households and businesses, and to increase the capacity, the generation of electricity on the continent by 30,000 megawatts. If you're not like an engineer, if you're not in this kind of thing, it's hard to tell what does that really mean. What that means, by just increasing it by 60 million households, that's doubling the current access to electricity that's on the continent. Which still might sound small to us, but that's enormous. It's enormous if you think about it, how the economic fruits from that can just multiply as a consequence. With $6 billion in new private sector commitments, the total commitments under Power Africa that we're anticipating are now more than $20 billion. On the very first day of the summit, we held a civil society forum. As I mentioned, even if we don't have the greatest relations with a couple of governments, we have great relations with the people of Africa throughout the continent. So we held here in DC also a civil society forum. And it was one of the signature events organized to drill down into the issues of specific interests, special interests, that when it comes to civil society. Secretary Kerry hosted a global town hall, the global town hall portion of that event. And one of the things that Secretary Kerry noted was that with the complexity of the world today, we need the expertise and the creative thinking that comes from civil society to address the multitude of issues that we're facing. And through our forum, that was one of the ways to show that. Yes, we had a week-long period of time where we were speaking with presidents and finance ministers and the top of the CEOs from all over the continent. But at the same time, we were reaching out to human rights organizations, conservation organizations, health NGOs, to say and young people, youth NGOs, we have got to engage all of society in our work and in our discussion about how we move forward as an international community. It's also worth noting that during the summit, and maybe with this little paragraph I'll end my summit, but it was so fantastic. There's really a lot to talk about. But as I said, there was a week of official government-to-government talk and meetings, but there were also over 80 side meetings, opportunities for businesses to communicate with each other, for leaders also to meet with other leaders and to meet various components of our American civil society. These events, these side events, were inspired by the fact that we were holding this summit. but they were led and organized by universities, by NGOs, by corporations and think tanks, and even by Congress. Thus, African leaders and African business people were not just engaging our government, but they were meeting representatives from across the United States, from across American society. Members of Congress also were very heavily invested in the success of the forum and the success of the summit, and they took time to attend the civil society events as well as our government events, and they also organized some of their own, focusing sessions on trying to get businesses, if they were from the House of Representatives, to their districts or to their home states. It was just a really fertile, a lot of cross-pollination going on. It was just a wonderful week. So those are just a few of the outcomes and a snapshot of the experience of the summit. And again, it was our opportunity to build with our partners, to reinforce our commitment to making sure we have a relationship that is dynamic and that is growing as opposed to contracting. But we also have some challenges that we're facing on the continent, and it's important to understand that as well. So one of the main challenges that I'm sure all of you have heard about, or at least, and maybe even be working on in your respective positions, is the current challenge that is facing West Africa, and that is of the Ebola outbreak. The president announced a major increase in our efforts to help the affected countries and to help the international community respond to the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. Right now, the three most affected countries by this outbreak are Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. As of today, that's where this outbreak is confined to. Ebola was brand new to West Africa, so it has been quite devastating to those three countries. But President Obama has already declared that this has got to be treated as a U.S. national security priority, and he has urged the entire international community to consider it in the same way and to address resources in their response to help those three affected countries in the same way. Let's see, I can skip down. We have experts, if you're watching the news at all, experts from our Centers of Disease Control and Prevention and other agencies have agreed that the chances of an Ebola outbreak in the United States are really extremely low, and that is really important to understand. But we in the U.S. and the international community would face a potential global threat if the spread of this virus goes unchecked, if the countries of West Africa and their economies break down, and if panic takes hold of the public. Ebola is a virus that West Africans have not encountered before, and their health systems, especially in Liberia, who were already breaking down under the demands that were being placed on it. These are countries with very limited resources. 2 out of 3 of them were just emerging, really, from their own really devastating civil wars. So it was a combination of, there's an expression for that about perfect storm of calamities that could hit at the same time that really sort of overwhelmed initially the institutional capacity of Liberia, particularly, but in many ways Sierra Leone too, to really respond appropriately. But help is there now, and we have responded robustly. We have also really, thanks to U.S. leadership, we have gotten the rest of the international community, particularly our partners in Europe, in the European Union, to step up not once, not twice, but 3 times the amount of assistance that they were initially thinking about giving. We have more than $175 million worth of assistance already to date that we've contributed to the response. The United States military, if you're not aware, the U.S. military we've already got, I'd say, about 400 of our soldiers there, but we are setting up a command post sort of in Monrovia. We will be establishing a hospital for some of the Ebola healthcare workers who might become infected with Ebola. We are setting up Ebola treatment units. I believe the United States government is building 19 Ebola treatment units that will be sprinkled around the country in Liberia, so that when Persons are identified, they can be separated from their communities and taken in whatever their region is or their little village area to a treatment center and immediately begin hydration and the other kinds of attention that needs to go to patients. There is a general from the United States Army who is going to be leading our effort in Liberia. And probably our effort was going to involve more than 3,000 U.S. forces altogether, working on a huge scale to get healthcare workers to the region, to transport, to distribute supplies, and to build additional treatment units. We'll also be providing more than 1,000 new beds for patients in Liberia, and we'll be training. Our plan is to train about 500 healthcare workers per week on how to handle these cases. To be a healthcare worker, you don't have to be an MD. You just have to follow a very strict, disciplined protocol on contact, how to interact with patients. And we're going to be training the healthcare workers that will be coming in. We have asked for volunteers from all over the African continent. The AU is going to be sending in an expeditionary force of medical and support healthcare worker personnel. The United States has got to play the leadership role in this crisis because there are some things actually still today that only the U.S. can do. We're good at mobilizing. We are good at logistics. We are also good at just organizing. Our U.S. military has a can-do attitude, and you give them the mission, and they do it. So setting up, how do you organize the issue from getting the information about who has contracted the disease, the virus, to who they've been in touch with? How do you set up the matrix to follow the contacts? It's called contact tracing. How do you do the lab tests? Make sure that those labs, that the blood tests are taken, that they're appropriately transported to the labs, which we're also building. All that. So essentially, we have recognized the need, we are responding effectively, and we are beginning to see that not only are we being supported and other countries are coming to the fore, but we're seeing positive results on the ground. But this is not a virus that will go away in a short span. This is not television. This is real life. So we're looking at a minimum of a 6-month response period. And I say that as hopefully as possible, but certainly it could be longer than 6 months that it will take to really feel that we have the virus totally under control. Another deep area of concern for us in Africa is the northeastern part of Nigeria. Many people, and I say that because of the threat of Boko Haram. The United States public probably maybe first became aware of Boko Haram when we had the incident in the spring of the kidnapping of the 200 women and girls from the Chibok village. But Boko Haram has been wreaking havoc in northern Nigeria for over a couple of years now, and more than 2,000 persons have been victimized by its violence this year alone. We have been working with Nigeria and its neighbors on a counterterrorism strategy against Boko Haram. Recent events in Borno State, which is part of northern Nigeria, show evidence of Boko Haram's brutality. But there are even more recent events as of last week where there are signs perhaps that we might be rounding a bend. And I have to say that just as gingerly as possible because there are negotiations that the Nigerians are involved in that are probably very delicate. And I say delicate because whenever you're talking about human life, that's delicate, but also because it's not 100% clear that the interlocutors are 100% or even 80% reliable. So while there have been hints that that elements within Boko Haram are ready to have peace negotiations and to return the kidnapped girls from that particular village back to their home, and there have been hints that there are indications that that elements within Boko Haram are ready for a ceasefire. The totality of those understandings is not well understood. So there is room for hope, and we'll be watching over the next week or so to see how far those things progress. Boko Haram started out as a very local Nigeria problem, which is why very few people in this country even heard about it. But as it turns out, as you see, it has situated itself in a way that it is now a regional problem. It's another regional problem for the West Africa region. But as a consequence, it is getting, the Nigerian people and government are getting the support from the countries around it: Chad, Niger, Cameroon, and Benin are helping and consulting and organizing, coordinating their militaries so that they can effectively respond to any kind of other terrorist or military assault from the Boko Haram elements. On the Central African Republic, good news. We have recently resumed operations in our embassy, Bangui. We had closed our embassy because of the unrest in that country and the violence in that country for several years. Closed it partially, meaning that we had no more American personnel in that embassy. And God bless them, the people who were keeping the little bit of information that we could get going were our local employees. You saw in the film that we have over 70,000 employees at the Department of State, including foreign nationals. We call those our locally employed staff. We used to call them Foreign Service nationals, as well as your direct hire Foreign Service officer. But it was our brave, committed, dedicated Foreign Service nationals, our locally employed staff, that continued to go to the embassy, that made sure that things weren't stolen, it didn't get ransacked, that they could still use the unclassified computer system so they could relay what's going on in the news, or they could just keep the lines of communication going, keep the bills getting paid. And our LES, our locally employed staff, from our embassy in Bangui, won the State Department-wide prize for the best LES staff of the year for his dedication through a very difficult time, and continued just the effort to continue to make sure that we knew what we needed to know about what was going on, and that our embassy remained protected and well-preserved space. So we're really very proud of them. And we're very happy now that we're going to begin to send back American officers to our embassy there. It's a good sign that we're doing that. What that means is that there's been progress made by the people and the leaders of the Central African Republic to work towards an end to the violence in that country and to help put the country back onto a path of peace and stability. The resumption of our work at Embassy Bangui coincided with the handover of authority for peacekeeping from the African Union-led mission to a UN peacekeeping mission, a multidimensional integrated stabilization mission, which is called MINUSCA. MINUSCA is going to continue to work alongside the French and the European forces that are still in CAR, but we now hope to see those efforts move forward towards a national dialogue and reconciliation, and to the free and fair and peaceful elections of new leadership in CAR. So that there's progress on the political side doesn't mean that the humanitarian crisis is over. And, well, the emergency there is over. It is not over. War is heartless and devastating, and people are hungry. They're without health supplies. There are urgent needs still, and the United States is there responding to them. We announced $28 million of additional funding in support of the humanitarian response in CAR, and with that $28 million, that means that for the fiscal year of 2014, the United States government has provided $145.7 million in humanitarian aid to CAR. Okay, I'll end on another positive note, and that's our Young African Leaders Initiative. Howard University, I think, hosted some of the YALI scholars, and I think some of the UC system did, but it may not have been UCLA, might have hosted YALI. But for those of you who don't know, the Young African Leaders Initiative is something that was started a couple of years ago, but President Obama gave it an upgrade and has added to it. So we now have what is called the Mandela Washington Fellowship Program, which is a signature program in the Young African Leaders Initiative. With the Mandela Washington Fellowship is an opportunity, creates an opportunity for young Africans between the ages of about, I'd say, 24 to 35, let's say, to come to the United States for a period of about 5 or 6 weeks for executive management training. And so many of you see night schools that perhaps offer you like after job or executive training. This is at our premier institutions, an opportunity for them to talk about the work that they're doing and get real grooming in leadership and management. We had openings for 500 applicants, 500 candidates, and we had over 50,000 applications for that 5 to 6 week opportunity. So we selected from those 50,000, 500, and they were able to come here. About 100 of those, after the program was over, 100 of those were able to stay for an additional period of time to shadow a leader in their field. If they were from an NGO, they were paired with an NGO and able to work side by side with them to see for a firsthand experience of how that works. If they were in business, if they were in government, it was wonderful. So after 6 weeks of training, the Mandela Washington Fellows, they all came to Washington and they met with our president. They met with President Obama. They also got to meet with the First Lady, with the Secretary of State, and with the National Security advisors, as well as a host of other cabinet and sub-cabinet officials. My assistant secretary likes to say, our assistant secretary for African Affairs is Linda Thomas Greenfield. And she often tells the YALI alumni that she meets on her travel, listen, we call this the Young African Leaders Initiative, but YALI is not what makes you all leaders. We, the United States government, we have created YALI to serve you, to serve the Africans already who are already leaders. And we want that to be a helpful tool, one thing that they can add to their tool chest of capabilities. Some of our YALI graduates have already put their tools to use in their communities dealing with the Ebola outbreak. Some of the fellows from the affected countries put together their own public service announcement on how to stop the spread of the disease, and they've been very active in public health outreach things in local languages and really smart about the best way to get the word out into really remote areas. So we've already started the application process for next year's YALI Fellows, and it looks like we're going to have even more than 50,000 applicants, because we've already got, I think somebody said we already had 15,000, and the website's been open for about 10 days. So the program that we had this summer is just the beginning of our investment. Now all of the YALI people are back in their home countries, and they have opportunities for networking with each other. They have opportunities to continue to have a relationship with our embassies overseas. Many American companies have that are located overseas or have offices and projects have said they'd be willing to help groom and work with our YALI graduates, our YALI alumni. So we're really very excited about the promise that holds. All right, I hope through this really fast-spoken presentation that I've given you a sense of the kinds of activities that we're doing that relate to Africa, that engage and target our U.S. priorities on the continent. And I am delighted, I'd be delighted to answer any of your questions that I'm able to. So thank you. Thanks. And if I don't know the answer, I'll just tell you, I don't know the answer.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My name is Martin Ayaba. I'm a graduate student at UDC, MPA. I just wanted to follow up on the Power Africa initiative that you mentioned, and to bring the problem that the people of the DRC, they are facing. This is a country of about 80 million people who kind of are covered in a big dark blanket because less than 20% of the population has power. So I don't know how this aid that has been channeled to Africa will be focused on resolving the problem in that country. And then the second question is about the Boko Haram. There were conflicting reports about the possible killing of the leader of that group.
About the killing of whom?
Of the leader of the Boko Haram.
Oh, right.
Thank you.
Okay. So why don't I answer them one by one? You want to start that way? We'll try it that way. Okay, DRC and Power Africa. What I didn't say about Power Africa was that initially, when the concept was announced, we said we were going to have 6 target countries. And so we were going to use those as like pilot countries to focus on. And then, therefore, we'd have a concentration of resources, and we thought those countries either had the infrastructure that was already best developed to be expanded upon, or that they had size, for example, in Nigeria, where simply the access to that electricity would have the largest impact. Excuse me. But as it turns out, as soon as we said, well, we're going to start with these 6 countries, 46 other countries in Africa said, wait a second, wait a minute. And what we have decided is that while we have centered our technical advisors throughout the continent, sprinkled them so that they're in easy access of our initial 6 pilots, the ability for a country to present a project for funding or for support through Power Africa is unlimited. And what they need are to have their necessary ingredients. They need to at least have the project. The government has got to be willing to do the right kind of regulatory controls, and in order to work with American companies and put something on the table. So DRC is not excluded. We have met with government and private sector from DRC. They're putting a lot of emphasis on the Inga Dam project, which is also a power generating project. And the United States right now is not supporting the Inga Dam, but I know there's a lot of private sector interest in it, so I wouldn't be surprised if that project got finished. So that's my answer to that. DRC is not necessarily excluded, but they've got to have the elements together for a project that's feasible. On Boko Haram, the Nigerian government announces about every 3 or 4 months that they've killed the leader of Boko Haram. So he's either a cat, or with more than one life, I used to say, or he's not dead yet. That's all I can say on that. Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Chio Moru, and I'm a doctoral candidate in political science at Howard University.
Okay.
And my main interest is in some of the things you mentioned around the private sector in the U.S. engaging in Africa, as well as the civil society on the ground in Africa. So in these crises areas that you've mentioned, whether it's Ebola or Central African Republic, I'm particularly interested in gendered in how women in both locations can be involved. And if you can please give a little more detail to your vision as to how, like for example, with Ebola, you mentioned healthcare workers, in what ways will the civil society be engaged, and in what ways could possibly are positive ways the private sector in the U.S. can be engaged, just to have a better understanding of your vision.
Okay. Well, one of my responsibilities is to help mobilize private sector resources from the United States, specifically in response to the Ebola crisis. We're going to need a lot of money. We're going to need a lot of money to just buy the supplies, the personal protective equipment, the PPE. People talk about the hospital beds, the medicines, the salaries for the healthcare workers who are risking their own lives and leaving whatever their day jobs are to go out into the hinterlands to respond to this crisis. So I will say this, the American private sector that is already engaged in those 3 affected countries. We have mining companies in Guinea, for example, and in Sierra Leone. We have oil companies in Nigeria that have come to the fore. We have GEs all over the place. So our American companies have really, they almost beat us to the coordination and the mobilization of resources on the ground. There is an international coalition of companies that were in the affected areas that on their own set up their own conference call of information exchange to be able to respond really quickly for in-kind needs. For example, setting up one of the places where we needed to have an Ebola treatment unit in a village in Sierra Leone. It was about 40 miles or something from a mine. So the company said, we will use our tractor, our people, our personnel, to create the road that you need from this remote village to the main road, and also to clear out the entire land space area that you need in order to set up this treatment facility. So in many ways, the American companies that are already in country have have indicated their total willingness to work with the governments of the host governments as well as to work with the international community to get resources there. How to get healthcare workers or civil society involved. As I said, people are looking for volunteers, and some volunteers are coming from in-country, and the African states are really mobilizing their citizenry appropriately. But you do need training. As I said, you do need to know how to handle these patients, what to do, what's supposed to be covered. We learned that ourselves right in this country, in Texas. So there's a combination of having a willingness of your civil society to come and be helpful, and then having an informed pool, a human resource. The first healthcare workers to fall sick, the Americans that fell sick, were actually missionaries/medical workers that really weren't experienced in infectious disease control. They were doing regular healthcare, which is why part of why they became sick, because you really have to have a strict protocol when you deal with this. So there is engagement of civil society. We are hiring or contracting with NGOs that are used to giving humanitarian aid or doing humanitarian projects in this region, and they will probably be the contracting entities that will take the volunteers of healthcare workers. Some schools are talking about not sending their students, but faculty, like their medical faculty, that can respond. Part of this response has got to be not just the actual healthcare worker to patient interaction, but you also need administrators. As I said, how do you run an emergency unit to make sure that the shipments, our U.S. military, they're staging things in Dakar. Then from Dakar, they get shipped to Liberia. How do we make sure things then get spread out? How do we do the contact tracing? Who knows where all of the other contacts of a patient, who's tracking all of that? So we need systems people that understand that. And that's where I said before, Americans are good at that. We do that. And we're taking that kind of enlistment. It is true that there is a gender-specific impact. This disease, well, I won't make parallels, but this disease is producing orphans. The heaviest transmission happened with persons who took care of the sick and dying. That tends to be the females in a community. And because of burial rituals in this area, which involve a lot of touching and kissing and washing of the body, some of the women in communities were dying very fast. That left their entire households exposed. Not only that, before the Ebola virus was well enough communicated throughout countries, sick people were just going to hospitals. Then villagers noticed that all the people in the hospitals were dying, so now women aren't going to hospitals for regular care, so they're not going there to have babies and for appendicitis or for whatever. So we're finding, as far as women and children go, a spike in infant mortality, a spike in maternal mortality during childbirth because people aren't getting the assistance that they need. And all those things are secondary and tertiary effects of this Ebola outbreak. And we're working on them. Sorry if that answer was a little long. Go ahead.
We have time for 2 more questions.
So canvass among each other and combine. Go ahead.
I'm Sophie Haggerty. I'm an undergrad at Georgetown.
Good.
And I'm just wondering what role you think regional economic communities like SADC, ECOWAS, East African Community will have with the U.S. as far as private investment and sort of making concentrated efforts to lower transaction costs for foreign investment.
You know, that's a wonderful question, and I wish that's a big challenge. We would like for the regional economic communities to more aggressively pursue economic integration in a way that we could have those kinds of discussions to specifically lower transaction rates for investment. Perfect. One of the other initiatives announced by President Obama was the Trade Africa Initiative, and that focuses specifically on the East Africa community, economic community. In most regions, you get most of your money from intra-regional trade. For example, NAFTA, Canada, US, Mexico. Or if you go to Asia, more than 55% of their trade really is within the Asian, I think it's 60%, among the Asian states. And then the rest is with maybe the US and Europe and stuff like that. But the the staple for income and trade is intra-regional, within the region. But in Africa, that's not the case. Only 11%, in the EAC, 11% of their trade is with the countries contiguous to each other. And all the rest, they're sending stuff to Europe, they're trying to send stuff to the US, maybe they're sending stuff to the Middle East. We are working in that initiative to try to reduce all the barriers to their interregional trade. Some of those have to do with every single port you go to has a different customs charge. The roads don't work very well. Telecommunication isn't any good. Everybody has different forms and stuff like that for the merchandise. So you've got to get regulatory control. You've got to get some consistency, some reliability, safety, all that kind of stuff. But if they were to do that, make that sort of investment, and come to a consensus among each other, then the profits would be significant. So we have some technical experts working on that. And I say that because that's a small group, really, when you compare it to SADC or when you compare it to ECOWAS. But it is a potentially lucrative group, and if it works there, then the other regional economic communities, might also take on the same thing. But pushing economic integration and trying to demonstrate through all different kinds of means has been one of our main démarches on the economic front on the continent for quite a while. I think the business forum, the U.S. Business Forum, was probably the best motivator in that regard, because all of the American, no matter how savvy some of our interlocutors thought that they were overwhelmed by the sort of interest and the potential. Sometimes our American market seems just too big for Africans and businesses, and even for some of the governments. They don't know where to start. They don't know what the entry is. But they realize that American business people are very open. We're ready to talk Turkey from day one, and that there are lots of doors. So I think we've given people great incentive, but it's an interesting and long, complicated discussion that we have to have on that effect. Sorry. Yes?
Hi, Joseph Gilliam, Cato Institute.
Okay.
Would you mind outlining some of the State Department's counterterrorism policies, not just in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also in North Africa as well? That's it.
Sub-Saharan policies. Counterterrorism policies. We are against terrorism, and we have various programs. I don't mean to be silly, but that work on it. My area is Sub-Saharan Africa, so I'd like to talk about the counterterrorism program, TSCTP. We have what's called the Trans-Saharan Counterterrorism Program, which combines our military resources with our USAID resources, our development assistance resources, and our public affairs resources into a comprehensive program that addresses what we call pull factors for terrorism, as well as some of the push factors. Pull factors being lack of opportunity, no jobs, nothing for kids, young people to do, restricting social space if you find that in certain instances religious conservatism is growing and youth feel like they don't have voice or outlet or university space. Those kinds of factors don't automatically mean somebody's going to become violent and extremist, but they can be elements that contribute to that. So we have programs within TSCTP that try to address that. We try to address that by creating space, funding community radios, funding programs that give students access to information and access to education when possible. We also work with community groups to try to get community leaders to engage their young people. That means working with traditional leaders as well as traditional religious leaders, as well as elected leaders and city councils. One of the big demarches that President Obama made while he was here, and he talked with the other presidents about what YALI meant to us, was to tell each of those presidents that, you ought to have specifically youth-directed programs and interaction to let your young people know you care about them. So, all right, so there's that aspect of our counterterrorism program. There are also training. We have training programs that deal with civilian and military relations. I was the ambassador in Niger, and I just came out of there in 2013. But up until about 2007, 2008, 2009, Niger had off and on rebellions by people in the northern part of the country, mostly Tuareg. Never was it a rebellion for secession, but it was always a rebellion for more attention from central government. So we have worked with the Nigerians, all of them, the government and civil society, to help them figure out. They already have decentralized and now have local elections, and they have community representation at the national as well as at the local level. But there's still, all the people that are young adults now, they were children during the rebellion. And they saw the antagonistic relationship between the military and their villages. So when they see a military walking down the street now, they're still inclined to be distrustful. So we have programs that talk about building trust and work on building trust. And those are civilian military programs. And how do you do that? How do you go into a community, a mountain community, let's say, and, go up there with your pickup truck that's got, gun truck or whatever, rifle sticking out in the back of it, and say you're here to help. It sounds sort of counterintuitive that people need to be taught that, but they do, and we know how, and we do, and we work on that ways. We work on that in various ways. Other parts of our TSCTP program have to do with building a kind of confidence in the government institutions. For example, if they're going to catch a terrorist, okay, fine. That they need to know how to collect evidence, they need to know how to hold a trial, there needs to be confidence that there's really a system involved, that the Ministry of Justice can be relied upon, that their jails are, number one, secure, safe, and that people are going to see that there's a process to this. So we have a lot of administration of justice things related. Particularly in the Sahel, there is a cross-pollination between just plain cartel sort of narco-trafficking or just trafficking and terrorism. But something that might have been an ancient mystical salt trade route has now become a contemporary narco route. I mean, the idea is just to get from point A to point B, and this is the best way through the desert. To get people away from trafficking, you have to be able to provide alternatives. And you also have to show communities, because communities know who the bad guys are. They know who the traffickers are in this instance. But you have to show them that there are repercussions for that. And you do that, you have to train and you have to help people build up their institutions of government. So, that partially answer your question? Thank you. Counterterrorism is more than just identifying a bad person and eliminating them. You have to work on a community. What we're trying to get is for communities to be healthy. So you have to approach that way. I've talked a lot. I appreciate your attention, and I wish you all the best, and I hope at least half of you will think about joining the Foreign Service. Thank you.
We'd like to thank Das Bisa Williams one more time for being with us and for taking time out of her busy schedule. And thank you to all of you for making an effort to be here today. It was great to have you. And please stay in touch with us via Twitter at EngageState or #FPClass. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.